Officer Jill back in the building. It's been a while, but I want to tell you guys how I recently went on a trip to Australia that was completely paid in full. How did that happen? Self development. I'm going to tell you how. Come on. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Human Side with yours truly, Officer Jill. I am an active police officer in Los Angeles, and you're probably thinking, how did a police officer get sent to Australia for 3 weeks for free? Well, listen up. I'm going to tell you how. Listen, the purpose of me creating this podcast and this YouTube channel is I want to create a space where we can experience each other better in our human side. So you can see me as an officer, but also as a human being, and I can create interact with you all as human beings. So I think sometimes we may lose sight, and that's one of the things that contributes to the challenges that we have in our relationship, right? And so I want to do a better job of that and be more intentional of showing you who I am as just a human being. Yes, I'm a police officer, but I am also a human being. So I want to be more intentional about that. And one of the ways that I want to do that is I want to share some things that I have learned over my 16 years and a certain critical change that I have developed over the past few years. And this change and this upgrade, if you will, afforded me the ability and the opportunity, I should say, to go to Australia to speak and exchange information with an amazing group of people, with an amazing group called Rotary International, specifically in the area of human trafficking. And so I want to break that down, how I was able to get in the position to be able to be considered and also fulfill the requirements that were requested of me when I went out there. Okay. Now, I want to make sure I don't ramble, but I want to be real. And so I have notes, so don't judge me. I'm going to look down and look at my notes just to make sure I stay on track. All right. So first thing I want to mention is one thing I've learned in my 16 years is that there are certain skills that you have to have when it comes to policing, right? You have to have a certain level of emotional skills, tactics, physical skills. Believe it or not, I know sometimes you see officers with, little belly hanging over. That's another issue. But there's certain skills that you have to have. And what I think is probably the most important skill is your communication skills. And I'll be completely honest. It's me being human with you. Those are some of those areas, those skill sets, I personally had to work on. I didn't have an expert level of some of those skill sets. And thankfully, going through the academy and doing the job, I was able to kind of refine and get that higher level of those skill sets that were required for the job. But what I've learned is that in order to really excel, I think that those skill sets in this job, and in order to do well in this job, that you really have to be super intentional about going higher when it comes to those skill sets and not just being okay with the basics, right? What I've learned is that when you are intentional about going higher in those skill set areas, there's so many opportunities that will occur both professionally and personally. Now, this is the thing. Like I said, I haven't always had this. Now, the tricky thing is I wasn't necessarily attempting to do this. What do I mean by that? I kind of was forced into discovering this. I was forced into discovering that in order to really reach a high level in those skill sets, you had to be intentional. And I was forced into that by a very unfortunate time during my career. First and foremost, I love my job. I love what I do. I've had some great opportunities to work with some amazing people. And so in the past, I used to work a very demanding and high stress position. It was a position that required me to be on call 24/7. and we were investigating uh, child exploitation and human trafficking. And it wasn't uncommon for me to, operate on 2, 3, 4, on a good night, 5 hours of sleep. And I did that for roughly about 7 years. And don't get me wrong, I loved it. I loved every bit of my job. I loved everything that I was doing. I loved the fact that I was able to help children who were being sexually exploited. I mean, it was the whole purpose of why I became a police officer, being able to help others who are unable or even incapable of helping themselves. So I love my job. I love the people that I was working with. However, I didn't realize that I was doing a lot of damage to myself and my wellness. I was living in a space where I had unchecked bad habits, right? Overextending myself, working extra hours, working overtime. And although I loved my job, I didn't realize how much it was really affecting me. And I didn't realize it because I was just in the groove. I liked it. I liked what I was doing. I was good work, right? I was in a rhythm. You're kind of just in the you get used to the chaos of it all. But this is what I didn't realize. I realized that I had unchecked bad habits, right? I was extending myself both personally and professionally in the form of having bad boundaries. I was trying to do everything. Like I said, I wasn't getting enough sleep. I would operate on 3, 4 hours of sleep regularly. I remember, a typical week for me was working all day, working a 10-hour shift. And if I was on call, I would go home. And there were several times where I would go home, pull into my driveway from working a full shift. My work phone would ring and said, "Hey, there's a 15-year-old that's being sexually exploited all the way in the valley, and you got to respond." Now, without telling where I live, let's just say that the valley is in the middle of the day in LA, an easy hour 45 2-hour drive for me, right? And now I have to work a case or work an investigation that's going to be on minimum 5 hours, right? And so that was a normal thing for me. No, and again, I loved it. I loved the job. I loved the thrill. I loved the investigation. I loved the fact that I was helping someone. I was doing good. It was great, but I was really hurting myself. I didn't realize that I was slowly building layer and layer and layer of bad behavior, not getting enough sleep, not minding my wellness, and just kind of rolling with it. And with that, I was playing into a very common, natural, normal phrase that is repeated oftentimes in the world of policing. And that is, it's just part of the job, right? I started to believe and adopt that idea, that lie, really, that is just part of the job. This is just part of it. Part of the job is not being well, right? And I didn't realize that you can actually be well and do this job well. However, now that didn't happen until later. So what forced me to get to that understanding? Fast forward, we get to COVID, right? The pandemic. And I was one of the few, I don't say the few, it was a lot of us. I contracted COVID during that first round. That was kind of dicey, right? No one really knew what was going on. We have a better idea of COVID now, but that first round was scary. And I was part of that first group that got COVID. And I'll just say I had a very bad run at it. I didn't have it as bad as some people, but I definitely had a rough ride. There were times where I couldn't breathe. I had to sleep sitting up. It was rough. And then to add more fuel to the fire, more than likely, I was patient zero in my family. And my elderly mother, tested positive shortly after I did. And so now we're quarantining and I'm trying to care for her and care for myself all during that time, we have an unfortunate death in the family. My grandmother passes away during that time. And all these things are just adding on what I had already built, a layer of unknown stress and bad wellness and bad boundaries and overextending myself and overworking, right? And it was just compiling on. And to continue with that stress, one by one, my elderly father gets COVID. One of my high risk brothers gets COVID. I mean, it was just a lot. And because I am the servant that I am, because I am the person as the police who takes care of other people, I just automatically assume that role to care for everyone else while I was trying to care for myself. And what I didn't realize, that last bit of stress of caring for everyone was the last straw that sent everything tumbling down. And I was experiencing a anxiety attack for the first time in my life. And it was the scariest moment of my life. You know, I've responded to calls in the middle of the night where you don't know if there's a person with a gun and all these different things that are scary. But it was nothing compared to what I experienced in that anxiety attack. And the crazy part is, I used to think that people who had anxiety attacks, I'll just be honest, I thought they were weak. I thought they were faking it. I used to tell them, I used to think, oh my gosh, just build a bridge and get over it. Relax. That was the thought that I had towards people who had anxiety attacks until I experienced it for myself. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Like, I literally thought that was the moment that I was going to die. And there was no question. And it was bad. And to the point where my brother had to rush me to the emergency room. Shout out to Cedars-Sinai. They took such good care of me. They ran all these different tests on me. All these things that were going on. At this point, I was testing positive for COVID. I was going into maybe I think around 2 months at this point. And so they were testing me, doing all these different things and to see if it was COVID related or if it was something else. And by the end of the trip, or the time that I was in the hospital, the doctor kind of came over and he asked me some questions, and I told him some of the things that were going on and what I do for a living, all these different things. And he basically just said, hey, yeah, this makes sense now. He said, you had an anxiety attack. And I'm like, what? An anxiety attack? I don't do that. I don't do those things. I'm Superwoman, right? I do it all. He said, no, it looks like you had an anxiety attack. And he gave me some ways to stay calm and to just kind of chill out and deal with all these different things. And it was in that moment and that experience that I realized I had to do better at taking care of myself and my wellness. And I knew that if I didn't, I was going to end up a statistic long down the road where you hear about officers who are, I'll just be honest, they're unhappy, they're moody, they're cranky. And unfortunately, sometimes the very unfortunate story that we hear about officers when they finally retire, and then it doesn't take very long, months, sometimes years, and they end up passing away just because they're not well or they don't take care of themselves well. And so I realized that that wasn't going to be me. I was not going to allow that to be me. And so what did I do? I became intentional about my wellness and building myself in order to avoid that potential future. And what did that look like? Okay. Well, the first thing is I had to take a look. I stopped and I took a look at what have I done in the past, right? There were other parts of my life where I was in certain crisis type of moments, not to the level of anxiety, but difficult times prior to that. And I take a look at what did I do to overcome those difficulties. And I noticed a few resemblances. One was there had to be a shift, and I had to forfeit the mindset that I had towards my own wellness and this job, right? I mentioned the common phrase or statement that is made in law enforcement, which is, it's just part of the job, right? And yes, I'll say absolutely the stress, the stress, the trauma, the challenges, sometimes not getting sleep, those things are absolutely elements that come with the job, 100%. But what doesn't come with the job is that you don't have to hurt yourself in the process of doing those things, right? Yes, all those things are there are elements that are part of the job, but not being well is not one of them. And I had to forfeit that mindset. I had to change the mindset of seeing taking in all that and having a bad wellness and not taking care of myself was just something I had to bow down to, if you will, and to give into that. And so that was the first thing I did. I checked myself. I got my mindset right, and I believe truly that you can be successful in this job, you can do well and be well, but it requires intentionality. It's not easy because there are so many different elements that are pulling you the other way. Society is pulling you that way. Internally, so many officers believe that it's just part of the job, and it's not true. And I know it's not true because I'm on the other side of that, right? So how did I get to the other side of that? One, I had to change my mindset. That was the first thing, okay? And what did that come with? That come with being willing to get help, which is a very challenging thing to do, especially in law enforcement, I had to be willing to get help and utilize the resources that were available to me. And I did just that. I reached out to our mental health wellness services that were available, and I utilized them. And they were huge. They were extremely helpful in getting me back on track. And that's something that I'm not ashamed or afraid to say. And I want to encourage any officers who are watching this, use the resources that are available to you. If you do not have access to resources, look into external, reach out to me. I will help you try to find ways to get access to resources that are available to you or not available, or the resources that you need to help you forfeit that mindset of thinking that bad wellness is just part of the job, because it's not. Okay. In addition to changing my mindset on that and forfeiting my mindset, I had to be honest that getting help is not weakness. It's not weakness. You have to change your mindset around that. The next thing that I noticed was now that I changed my mindset, now I had to develop and flourish in the area of having what's called a growth mindset, right? Of improving my mindset and believing that, guess what? There is more. You can do well in this job and be well in this job, right? And thirdly, I had to do what I call, I had to forge and building that resilience, because there's going to be a lot of resistance. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be questioning or challenging what you think. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities for those negative influences to come back and those challenges to come back. But I had to forge through that and build that resilience. And a lot of that came from utilizing outside resources and community, getting a life coach, being in community, being in places where thriving and not just surviving was a thing. What did all these things do? What I noticed from doing all these things and going through this process of forfeiting my mindset, flourishing in a growth mindset and building myself up and forging and building more resilience. What I noticed in this process, and back when I did this prior to the panic attack, to the anxiety attack, what I noticed is that as I was going through these processes, I was building certain skill sets in myself. They were getting better. They were getting stronger. They were getting to a higher level. My communication skills got better. My emotional skills got better. My emotional intelligence got better. My ability to identify the emotions both in myself and in others and being able to respond in the proper way got better. What is that? That's self-development. I noticed all these things improving. And as all these things improved, I started to get opportunities professionally in certain ways that I maybe would not have. My ability to interact with people, my both personally and professionally improved. Ultimately, leading to me being suggested as someone who could go to Australia and provide an exchange of important information and teaching and training in a very important area of the sexual exploitation of children. Because I was suggested as someone who could do this, who could carry out this mission, if you will, they obliged by sending me along with a team of other experts in this area to Australia for 3.5 weeks, and they paid for the whole thing. And while I was there, speaking to so many different people and meeting different people, law enforcement, the government, NGOs, all these different people, I realized that chances are, if I wasn't intentional, if I wasn't serious about seeking better wellness and improving myself and self-development, chances are I don't get this opportunity. And how unfortunate that would have been if I not have been able to not only share the experience and the expertise that I had developed during my 7 years of investigating human trafficking, but also the relationships that I was able to build and connect and the networking. So what is the whole purpose of this video? The most important part I want for you to take from this video, especially if you are an officer, okay, is that your growth can take you to places that you have no idea are there. But it's going to require some intentionality. You're going to have to forfeit this idea that it's just part of the job, right? I want to challenge you to be willing to look at your wellness, to be intentional, to take some time to develop yourself. I hope that this was some insightful information for you. If you're an officer and you're watching this, I hope this encourages you to think outside the box as well and to take some time to improve yourself, to break up and forfeit that idea that being overwhelmed, being burned out, being overstressed, being overworked, and having bad wellness is just part of the job, because it's not true. But it's going to take you being intentional about pursuing something better. And if you're not an officer, feel free to take my advice as well. I hope this has been an insightful and enlightful conversation. And if nothing else, I hope that you are able to see me, Officer Jill, as just Jill and as a human being just like you. I would love to know what you think in the comments below. In addition to that, what are some of the things that you want to hear from me? What are some other things what are some other topics you want me to talk about here? If you like the video, go ahead and like it. Feel free to subscribe as well. And if you want to be on the show, if you want to have a human conversation with me, my contact information is in the comments below. Go ahead and holla at your girl. Most important, you already know, if you show me your human side, I show you mine. All right, y'all.